What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Speaking Nerd podcast, bringing you all things nerdy and everything today regarding Batman. We're going to be talking about the masterpiece by Frank Miller, Batman Year One. There it is. I should have brought mine out. And today we got the Batman hat that I'm rocking. I was going to rock the new one I bought today, the Killing Joke one, but I rocked that for the intensive treatment episode, which you can go check out as well when it is up. But probably when this goes up, that will be out. So today we're just going to kind of generally be talking about Year One, what we like, what we don't like. I think too, it adds to the excitement of the Batman, which is coming out in 2 weeks. I think my mind, and maybe yours as well, is like Batman intensified right now. It's kind of all I can think about regarding comic books. It's crazy because within a month, 2 months time, it's like we go from thinking about nothing but Spider-Man, and now we're thinking nothing but Batman. It's like comic book heaven right now. Two of my favorite comic book characters are getting extreme amounts of limelight right now, especially Batman. He hasn't had any Hollywood kind of presence lately. So I'm really excited, very excited. So let's get on and talk about Year One. Why don't you start and kind of talk about what you think of Year One, or wherever you want to start?
Yeah, so Year One, this was at a time where Batman's image in the comic book space kind of was brought back to basics. So in 1985, The Dark Knight Returns came out. It was a huge, influential book, still like one of the best Batman stories ever. It's not the best, in my personal opinion. I actually prefer Year One over Dark Knight Returns, but
I as well do.
I will still say that it is still pretty like an influential book. It is still really good, despite what the naysayers say. AJ, yeah,
you should have been in the episode, AJ, but
yeah,
he had French class.
Yeah, he did. So Frank Miller, on his massive popularity high with Dark Knight, he was like, well, let me write the origin story for Batman. And this, I think, I mean, it came out of Dark Knight, but I think it also came out of Crisis, because DC was doing their huge reboot of the multiverse and the timeline. It became so confusing to the point where they just decided to hit the reset button. And I think this book was part of that whole idea. So this was at first in the mainline Batman books. This is just a random story they just threw in there. 4 issues, I think, I believe. And then later on, they made it into a graphic novel, and through subsequent releases. The one I have here, this was pretty recent. I got a copy of the Year One animated movie, which we'll talk about later, just as part of conversation. But great Batman story. Like, just getting our thoughts out of the way. It is a really good Batman story and one of my personal favorites. But what about you?
Well, for me, when I read it as the definitive Year One. I mean, I read it as the origin story of Batman. And I take it for what it is, which is, if that's what it's going for, it's great. It really dives into, it's a very gritty book. It really gets down to Bruce Wayne's mindset of kind of where he wanted to go. Still a very immature person. Doesn't know exactly how to control himself or to become the Dark Knight that he'll eventually be. And I don't really think that, I think the book conveys that Batman didn't really necessarily know or want to be a Dark Knight. He more so wanted to just be this silent protector who used a lot of very, very harmful methods to criminals and wanted to give justice. But it really shows just the level of immaturity, and I think that aspect of the book makes his maturity in the later books so much more, so much greater, and you can see how he's developed as a character.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so I really love this book. I've read it multiple times. I haven't read it in a while, but when I first bought this graphic novel, it was all I could read. I read this thing cover to cover, back to back all the time. And I was a happy camper when I first bought this because, you know, I had seen, and actually I had seen the movie after I read it. Thank God. Not to knock on the movie, but the book is just, there's something about the Batman books that conveys a sense of realness to the character that the animated films don't have, in my opinion. Yeah. So this story is great. Frank Miller did a great job. So the naysayers, your opinion, but I do believe it's invalid.
Yeah. This is a fantastic book. Like, when I first read it, I was in middle school. And, we'd go to the library like every couple of weeks. We would pick out a new book. And of course, me, my nerd ass, I would go over to the graphic novel because I didn't feel like reading a giant novel like Twilight or whatever that garbage is. So the ones they had available, it was like Year One and then Hush Volume One. And like I'd read, and I, for years, like my entire middle school was just reading Year One over and over and over again. Like I loved this book to back. And when I bought it myself at a convention, like I just found it for like, I don't know, $20. And I just, like every time I read it, those feelings that I have just came, like they just come flooding back. Like, it is an amazing story. Frank did an amazing job, and also give credit to the artist David Mazzucchelli, however you pronounce that last name. He's probably one of my favorite Batman artists of all time. Like he does such a great job with this book. Like it's very it has that very noir sensibility about it, which is what I always like about certain Batman stories. Just bring that kind of noir detective element in there, which most of the later ones they don't really do. It's more just about action than just in spectacle rather than just being intense and personal. Yeah. So
I think I was just going to add real quick that some of my favorite stuff in the book as well that I don't hear enough people talk about is the dynamic between Commissioner Gordon and Batman. It really sets up the relationship really well. And I love all the stuff just involving Gordon, where Batman's not involved. I think Gordon's story is really good. And also, as well, again, Frank Miller does a great job at just character development in general, of having them very underdeveloped in this story, proving that it is an origin story. And it's kind of not just the origin for Batman, but the origin for this new era of Gotham City. I think Gotham City, people tend to forget, we've talked about this before, but Gotham is a character within itself. Well, we were talking about Arkham Asylum, but Gotham is a character. And I think there's a couple different phases of Gotham as a character. There's before Batman, and then there's during Batman, and then there's after Batman. And this is leading into the during Batman period, which I think shows how organized crime is really the focus and not so much supervillains, which I love about that.
Yeah, we're still at a point where the mob is in full effect. There's not really a whole lot of supervillains that pop up in this book. And like, I think for me, like, those are probably my favorite parts of this book, not just like the whole mob aspect of, how crime was at that point in Gotham, but also Jim Gordon as a character. Like, Jim Gordon is my favorite character in the entire book. Like, his story is, to me, one of the best parts about it. I love his dynamic with everybody, with Detective Flask and Batman, and you're right. This is like, it's not fully realized. This is not Commissioner Gordon realized in that role. Like, he's still Captain Gordon at this point, I believe, and then
Yeah.
like he's like slowly working his way through the crime element and the corruption at the police department with Detective Flask and Commissioner Loeb and all them. Like that story, like is probably my favorite part of the entire book. Like I just love all of that.
Yeah.
Even more so than Batman himself. But
Yeah, I would completely agree. It goes back to my point of like really setting up Gotham rather than almost anything else. Especially without the police department stuff and the story with Gordon that's continually going on throughout year one. Without any of that, none of the way that we see Gotham in any of the books would matter at all. It wouldn't be the way it is. And the things that Captain Gordon does ultimately affects the rest of the Batman universe and mythos to come after that. So Gordon is more of an integral character in this book than almost all the other major graphic novels, I think. And his character, like you said, it's so well done. And his dynamic with all the other people around him is spot on. I love it to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes Gordon my favorite kind of Bat family characters. And it always upset me when people, like we're talking about on Twitter, like people just talk shit about Gordon and, you know, say all these things, but it's just like, well, he's actually, you know, he's more important than you would think. Especially it shows in this book too, just how important he is to this city and the characters around him. So
people need to realize that seriously, without Gordon's allegiance to Batman, Batman would be a complete outlaw and would be wanted by the police more than he already is. Gordon is the unthanked savior of Batman as a character himself. Without Gordon, Batman could not continue, at least in the way that he does. And you know, Batman's relationship with the police, people don't think of the GCPD as an integral role in Batman as much as they should. But without them, a lot of what he does wouldn't be able to be done. So Gordon, in that sense as well, people got to stop shitting on Gordon, or I will shit on you. No, but yeah, Gordon is way more important than a lot of people paint him to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do have a point there where, like, without that connection between Batman and Gordon, he would just be an outlaw, and they'd be like hunting him every night, and you know, just make it even harder on Batman. So the fact that, you know, at first, you know, there's this deep kind of, you know, thing about both of them where, you know, Batman's trying to do his thing, but you know, Gordon, you know, because he has to uphold the law and, you know, stand up for the values that they stand for, has to, you know, put his foot down and be like, hey, we don't, like, this vigilante is causing all this trouble. We need to take him out. And I always like that about early Batman stories where they kind of focus on that. I was never really a fan of, like, in The Dark Knight, where, like, when Batman shows up, Gordon's just like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
He's here. Like,
right.
Like, I like to have that kind of build up where at first they don't like each other. And, you know, you think that, you know, Batman would never trust Gordon and Gordon is just going to arrest Batman. But slowly throughout the book, you know, it starts to change. And by the very end, you know, they become partners in a sense. And there's that connection between Batman and the Gotham police. I like that kind of thing. So,
yeah. I think that the Batman persona and Commissioner Gordon's character shows that, at least in my eyes, Commissioner Gordon is the only true best friend and colleague that Batman ever has. because he shares the same views and values that Batman has. Obviously, Gordon does it in a way that is in line with the law, which holds Gordon back from doing what Batman does. And I think Gordon reminds Batman of the thing that he wishes he could do, which is have that amount of effect without being Batman, without going against the law and being a vigilante. But he can't, and that's the only way he can do what his life was destined to be. But Gordon is kind of the white knight to his dark knight.
Oh yeah.
So I think that relationship is really set on course in this book, in a really great way. And it's something that they take in a lot of other sources of Batman. I mean, you can see it in Arkham Origins. That same kind of thing happens. And I'm sure they'll have it to as an aspect of it in the new movie coming out. I don't doubt it. So, and you can even tell there is a little bit of tension between Gordon and Batman. There's not a trust. It's not like Gordon can just go to Batman for anything or vice versa.
Yeah.
So yeah, their relationship is very integral.
Yeah. Another thing we kind of touched on earlier was just kind of the evolution of Gotham, from it turning into, this crime-ridden, place full of mobsters and gangsters and all that, and slowly kind of turning into this crazy place with, maniacal clowns and people who can just shoot ice and plants at you. They don't really go too full into supervillain type stuff. There is a start to it, and we get that with Catwoman, which we'll talk about in a second. And at the very end, this guy who calls himself the Joker, whoever that could be. But yeah, I do like that kind of thing where it's like it's slowly the crime empire as it is just kind of slowly fizzles out, and all these crazy super people come in just to take over what was and completely change it from then on.
It almost feels like in this book, it gives the illusion that the more comfortable Bruce Wayne becomes with becoming Batman as his true identity, the more chaotic Gotham becomes, to kind of test Batman's strength and to test if he can even protect the city at all. Hence, bringing in Joker at the very end. Like, the end of year one is the start of the rest of Batman's journey as Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. If you want to start touching on Catwoman as well, because we kind of just segued into villains at this point. Yeah, so we can touch on that if you want.
This is probably one of my favorite interpretations of Catwoman, where, she starts out, in one of the worst spots in Gotham as a prostitute, not really making much, not really having a whole lot of impact. And then one day, Batman shows up and she decides hey, I can, make some sort of difference, whether it be good or bad. And, she doesn't really do a whole lot, honestly, especially towards the end. But her introduction is one of my favorite parts of the book, is when, Batman's on this secret patrol trying to, get an idea of the kind of crime that's going on within the streets. And then, he starts this whole brawl with a bunch of people, and then Catwoman just shows up. And kicks his ass. You can start to see that kind of implication for later on, where they do kind of form this sort of on and off relationship. And it's just more like what the hell are you? What are you doing? This giant bat thing, just doing whatever he wants. And but yeah, Catwoman is a pretty cool character, I'd say, in the book.
I don't think there's much for me to add, because you're right. She really doesn't have too much of a role after the beginning of the book. But I agree, her introduction is great. And the fact that she comes from how it portrays her as coming from this really dirty, gritty lifestyle and area of Gotham, just adds to kind of like this almost like a redemption story in a way of how, and it shows Batman as a character, that Batman instills an inspiration and this sense of I can be more than what I am.
Yeah.
And that is something that this book conveys really well. Again, I don't know why this book gets all the controversy and hate, I guess, because of Frank Miller writing it, it's controversial, but he did a great job with portraying Batman's influence on not just villains and citizens, but also people like Selena Kyle who aren't sure what they are. She just wants to make a difference, like you said.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that aspect of this.
Yeah, and that's the element too, like the different families, like pretty threatening stuff, like especially from like say like Carmine Falcone, which he gets a lot of, time in the sun along with Commissioner Loeb, which I would say those are the two kind of main antagonists for the book. But yeah, it's interesting kind of seeing that mob type element with Batman stories, because a lot of the time, it's Batman dealing with a supervillain and some crazy dude like with riddles and like just all this other shit. But you never really get like Batman taking down an organization of just different tiers of crime.
Yeah. I think, and I kind of want to, because we're kind of on this topic, I kind of want to show the influence that Year One actually had on a lot of other Batman interpretations. Because people tend to sleep on how influential this book was. But I mean, as far back as I can remember, at least to the point of after Year One came out, almost every interpretation of Batman in major mainstream media has taken from this book. I mean, Batman Begins, we can start at. There's elements of that. Carmine Falcone, Gotham's Underground. That's definitely a big part of it. And, obviously Arkham Origins, you can see that as a big part of it. And now with the Batman, we might get that more than ever. The connection between the mob and Batman and the police department. We're getting a whole damn show dedicated to the GCPD and the story of how it got corrupt. And for any of you that don't know, well, when police stations get corrupt, usually, at least back in the day, it was because of the mob. So I think that Year One has influenced so much on so many levels. When you listen to people talk about, especially directors and things of that sort, and they're doing kind of an origin story on Batman, it's always based off of, or at least loosely based off of Year One. The influence is crazy, and people kind of write it off. So I don't want you guys to do that anymore, or I will find you and I will kill you.
So many Batman projects, like just off the top of my head, have taken so much. Like the Nolan films, I'd say definitely took the most with that story. And like the Batman, especially the cartoons, and even other books like Batman Earth One, I remember having a lot of kind of parts of it that felt very Year One-ish. And even though it never got made, they were going to make an adaptation, a live-action adaptation of Batman Year One. It wouldn't have been, followed as close to the book, but like that's the power this book has, to where like you're going to make a movie about it, a big budget live-action movie centered around this story. So and then of course there's the movie, which we'll talk about later. But.
I also think that, out of the two books that Frank Miller has written, those being Year One and Dark Knight Returns, I think Dark Knight Returns gets too much spotlight. We know that the BVS Batman was heavily based off of the Dark Knight Returns. and in a way, it's almost like the DCEU's movie adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns in a way. Um, and it's just interesting because that book is revered, but Year One kind of is pushed off to the side. A lot of people forget about it. People don't remember, at least on a mainstream level, that it was written by Frank Miller and that was kind of his way of, he was, like you said earlier in the beginning of the podcast, it was like his shot up to stardom in the DC world. He was like, well, take it back to basics. I got this really big book out and I'm going to release another one. Let's see what happens in the first year. I don't hear, apart from Batman fans, like hardcore Batman fans, I don't hear really anybody talk about Year One at all. But you always hear, Zack Snyder reveres The Dark Knight Returns. Thinks it's, I don't know if he said it's the greatest Batman comic of all time, but a lot of people think that. I, for one, do not think that at all. And I think Year One is much better than Dark Knight Returns.
I would agree too. Yeah, you are right that most of adaptations, especially older Batman, they take a lot from Dark Knight Returns. And I would even say Year One too. Like we mentioned all the stuff for the cartoons and movies and stuff, and it is kind of a bit overused, but it's still like a really fun, enjoyable story. And but you're right. I feel the same way, where there are better Batman books than like Dark Knight. For me personally, I like Hush more than Dark Knight, but that's just me.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think that maybe my main point is, like, we've seen the Year One kind of adaptation, obviously in the Nolan movies, and now we're getting it again in the Batman. And like you said, some comic books and also some TV shows have shown elements of Year One. And I think we've kind of gotten too much. But I think my main point is that I wish Year One got the credit for being Year One as a comic book that it deserves. Because some people would say, "Oh, well, that's the Batman Begins origin story or something." No. This is the Year One origin story. Batman Begins took from that. And I just wish Frank Miller's Year One got as much attention from mainstream media as The Dark Knight Returns does, which I think is not as good of a book. Not to knock on The Dark Knight Returns, good book, but not, in my opinion, as great as this book.
Yeah, totally. I think because we talked about influence, and we also talked about people bashing on this book and Dark Knight. I think a huge part of that comes from the fact that after this, like, just slowly Frank Miller went crazy and just wrote a whole bunch of shit.
You're right, he did. Just went crazy like the Joker.
Like he did.
He became the Joker.
Yeah. Like he did sequels to Dark Knight. Like he did Strikes Again and The Master Race, which is good. Like he did Batman Spawn, and it's got a whole lot of weird shit there. And All-Star Batman and Robin, which
he just got too Batman trigger happy. Like, that's the issue with that.
Yeah. I think Sin City also had a part of it too, where after writing that, he's just like, well, I'm just going to make Sin City Batman version, or Sin City, like, whatever. Like, he just didn't really get, like, he just didn't care a whole lot, putting his talents to use with the books he was writing. But
yeah.
Is there much else to say about the book? Because I feel like we've covered pretty much everything.
We have. Obviously, like, you guys know that we could go through a bunch of the scenes in the book, but if you've read it, you know it. Because the book is really just about if we're talking specifics, the book is just about the development of really Commissioner Gordon and Batman at the core. And that's what we get. And all the stuff in between that is really awesome. Especially that final police battle with Batman. I love it. But again, you guys know, if If you're watching this video, then you know about year one. So
Actually, you know what? I was going to ask you just because we brought that up. What is your favorite moment from the book? And what's your least favorite moment?
mm, I think I'm going to go from judging off of what my initial favorite moment was, because now that I'm older and understand the book a lot more, I have so many favorite moments. But my first favorite moment in that book was that final GCPD showdown with Batman. I thought it was awesome when I was younger. I still think it's awesome. I feel like a kid when I read that part.
Yeah.
But really anything, I mean, now that I'm older, I think the more boring stuff that we find boring as kids is the most interesting stuff, like the conversations between Commissioner Loeb and Gordon. That stuff is great, especially to develop the story. So now I would say a lot of like the GCPD stuff is probably my favorite thing about the story, but definitely my initial favorite was that showdown. What about you? What's your favorite?
My favorite, surprisingly or weirdly enough, is actually the very beginning of the book when you first see Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon coming into Gotham and seeing, because Bruce flies in and Gordon takes the train to Gotham. So, and Bruce, he's doing his whole inner monologue talking about, just how Gotham is and how he should have been on ground level to kind of assess the threats more naturally. And then when you see Gordon just kind of pondering into himself, seeing how much Gotham is just an absolute shithole. Stuff like that, just kind of little character moments, is stuff that I appreciate in the long term. I will say that that whole scene of them inside the warehouse, like Batman versus GCPD, that is awesome. It's probably one of my favorite set pieces, like action set pieces in the book. That's the very end when they're all like on the bridge and trying to save the baby. Like that's pretty great. But yeah, that very like the very beginning of the book, just seeing those two different perspectives on Gotham is great.
Yeah. What's your least favorite moment from the book?
That's a hard one.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I was going to say I don't really have a least favorite moment personally, because I don't really find a spot in the book really boring.
No.
Especially the older I get, it's like I read it and it gets more interesting every time I read it.
Yeah. I'd say just on the top of my head, I don't really have a scene, but I have some things that bother me in hindsight. Like, we don't really get a whole lot of development for characters like, say, Alfred. Like, we don't really know much about him. Like, we know what's Alfred. Like, we know Alfred personally, but like, he's not really there enough to get a character out of that. So,
yeah.
Besides that, like, that's very minor shit. But
yeah. I think a lot of people would think, just based off of how much we were talking about earlier, how Catwoman kind of takes a backseat, they would expect me to say like, well, Catwoman not being in it maybe would be my least favorite aspect. But I do think her not being in it as much really helps in a way, because it gives time to flesh out Gordon and Batman. This book really isn't very long, especially judging from other graphic novels in the Batman mythos. So I think that's actually a strength, because there's a whole lot of Catwoman and Batman comics to come after that. So yeah, I don't know that I have a least favorite part, but I guess the lack of development, even if it was little things, they could have done little things to kind of develop characters more for side characters. I'm just going to change my positioning because I am hurting. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of my final verdict.
Yeah, the book's great. Let's talk about the animated movie, just to kind of get it out of the way. So it came out 2011, I want to say. Like DC animated movies, they were like just pumping out, great movie after great movie after great movie. Like I just rewatched Green Lantern First Flight recently, and that's probably one of my favorite DC films.
Yeah,
it's a lot better than the Ryan Reynolds movie for sure, but like back in their heyday, they had really a lot of great stuff. And Batman, they did their fair share with him, which were more just adaptations of Batman stories. Like they did Year One, they did Dark Knight Returns. They did some books that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but oh my god. But Batman Year One, though, going back to it, I think it's good, but there are some things that bug me.
Namely,
now, like just as an example, like I think the pacing is way too quick. They didn't really know how to kind of structure the story in a coherent way, because moments in the book like that take up like maybe 2-3 pages are just kind of brushed over in like less than a minute. So, and the biggest thing for me, Ben McKenzie as Batman. I think he is awful as Batman. Like his dialogue, like even in the very beginning of the movie, it's very stilted and unnatural. Like, he sounds more like a robot than he does Batman.
Yeah.
If there's anything to go by in terms of absolute perfection, it's Bryan Cranston as Jim Gordon. Like that's probably one of my favorite castings of all time.
Yeah.
But yeah, good movie. Not really much else to say other than that. What do you think?
I would even go a little bit less than good. I really don't find myself watching it like ever. I don't really ever go back to it. Once in a while, maybe once a year, when I like rewatch a lot of the animated movies, kind of in whatever order I feel like it, I guess. When I rewatch those, I go back to it, but that's really it. I don't like, it's not like Under the Red Hood or something where I'm just like, I want to watch this tonight. Like, I just want to watch it to enjoy something. I'm not really going to watch that. I'll just read the book for that. Like, honestly. But, and I think we could say this for another video, but I would watch the Dark Knight Returns movies for enjoyment over Year One, the movie.
I would.
Like that, it's an interesting dynamic, I think, because we both think the book is better, but the Dark Knight Returns as a movie, I think, shines a lot brighter than Year One does. But we can say that for another video. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I will agree on you with that. With Dark Knight, like I love the animated movies, both of them. Even together, just watching them as one whole movie, I think is great. And I kind of like it better than reading the book. Like, that's just a me thing, but like, but yeah, you're right. We can save that for another time. We'll gush all about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as animated movies concerned, it's not the worst thing I've seen. It's not the fucking New 52 animated universe bad, but
we don't even need to talk about it.
Oh my god. But yeah, it's not the greatest thing. Any final thoughts before we close out the video?
No, everything I've already said has been said. I love this book to pieces.
Yeah, I love this book too. I think more people need to read it because I mean, even though it is like one of the quintessential Batman books, it doesn't really get a whole lot of love. So
no, I think if you're watching this video and you haven't read Year One, you should really pick up a copy. Or, a lot of times what I would do before I could buy comic books myself was I listened to the audiobooks on YouTube. There's a lot of really talented YouTube voice actors that voice the characters.
Mhm.
Killing Joke being one of my favorites, if not my favorite audio graphic novel for Batman. But I mean, whatever way you can, read this graphic novel, even watch the movie. I mean, I would say watch the movie definitely, even if you read the book, because it does give an interesting perspective on the book as well. But yeah, read this book, give it the credit it deserves, please. Like, hold it up like Simba in The Lion King. Like,
it's just like this.
Again, I feel like I'm really overpraising it sometimes, but it really is a good book. I don't mean to overpraise, because it's by no means my favorite Batman book. But it really is it's a really solid, really good, great origin story, and a really good entry in the mythos of graphic novels for Batman, I think.
Yeah, like if you want to read a story of Batman in his early years, like this is the go-to book.
Yes.
Even more so than books like Earth One or even Zero Year, which is good. And even the Robert Pattinson movie has a lot of inspiration from that too. So, but yeah, still one of the greatest. Like it is one of the if you're new to Batman, like this is the book. Like there's nothing more that needs to be said. So go read it. It's cheap. You can find it everywhere. Get a copy either physically or digitally, and go to town on it. But that's pretty much going to cut it for this episode of the Speaking Nerd podcast. We're in a bit of a Batman kind of mood, so we might dedicate a couple videos to Batman related stuff. There is one topic that I have in mind that if, say, next time all four of us are here, then I want to talk about.
You keep bringing it up, and I'm like dying to know. He hasn't told me what it is yet.
No, I haven't told you. I haven't told Walter. I did tell AJ, but
that bastard.
Well,
I hope you see this video, AJ, because I'm not talking to you.
So, but yeah, I'm not telling you what it is. But
if he, okay, wait a minute. If he appreciated it the most, I'll have a guessing game after this is over, because I'm gonna think.
All right, take a guess, and I'll tell you if you're right or wrong about it.
Okay, Brave and the Bold has something to do with Brave and the Bold. Damn it.
Close,
okay.
But no.
Oh, damn.
But no.
Damn it. I could have sworn. That's it. That's like his favorite. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, you're right there, but
animated series?
No.
Oh damn. Okay, I guess Brave and the Bold was closer.
But anyway, until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Links for everybody in the description, channel wise, Twitter, whatever have you. Go
also check out. No, I was gonna say also check out Marvel and I's joint podcast, Intensive Treatment.
I was about to say, yeah, we got Intensive Treatment over on Swfte's channel. We're having a lot of fun with that, and I think by the time this goes up, the fan theories video will be out. Or
for sure, it will.
Some topic will be out. So check those videos out. They're a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun with them. So. Have a great night. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, don't forget to take care of yourselves.
See you guys.
Yeah.